Coming up on this episode of the Roundtable. All this stuff that people are saying about how Trump is a bad guy. Sure, you could pick around the edges of his rhetoric or when he says this and that, but really they're just mad because for however long this war has been going on, the Democrats have been indulging in this insane, like Marvel movie fantasy that somehow we're gonna, from afar, fund the return of the Avengers and like Zelensky's going to get his country back, which, to be clear, from my own perspective, like would be great. Like Putin's the aggressor. To me, this is like a bad war. And for all of the questions about 2014, Victoria Nuland, and whatever, like you don't invade Ukraine. Yes, there's been this like whole historical dispute, whatever. All I'm saying is like, I also would like to see the fantasy version that Democrats have been putting forward. It's never going to happen. They're not going to win this war. They're not going to get this stuff back. And the sooner you admit that, the sooner you can start saying, well, what is the best way, basically, to sort of like restore stability? But in order to admit that, you have to be willing to get called an evil Putin stooge and a Trumpist fascist or whatever. Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books and the non-card holding editor of the American Mind. I am joined this week by Seth Barron and managing editor Mike Sabo. And they say that peak TV is over. They say that time has passed. But I ask you to consider this. If you watched TV starting on last Thursday, you could have begun your week with the new episode of Severance on Thursday night. So you could see the best show on TV in a long time. Then on Friday, you could have watched on C-SPAN as President Trump and Vladimir Zelensky erupted into an extremely heated dispute over the future of Ukraine. Then on Sunday, you could have watched the new episode of White Lotus, which is kind of a filler episode, but still great show. And then you could cap it all off on Tuesday night with not the State of the Union, but the presidential address to Congress, an hour and 40 minutes of uninterrupted hilarity. I say that only a bit as a joke. It really was one of the most entertaining versions of this particular American spectacle I think I've ever seen. And I just feel that when historians look back on this moment, it's hard to imagine they'll find a better week of TV in America's history than we've just lived through. So we should be very grateful to be living in this time of American comeback, as Donald Trump would say. Obviously, I'm being a little flip, but we did actually want to start out by talking about the theatrics of this speech. I think that's a fair word to use. Trump has always been a showman. He has mellowed out in some notable ways that maybe we'll get into, but this was very much a kind of politics by theater. And the Democrats came ready to participate. Many of them had signs that said false or lies, kind of the built-in fact-checking section in the Democrat section of Congress. We had one minor incident when Al Green, a Texas representative who was the first ever to bring articles of impeachment against Trump, so a real veteran of the hashtag resistance, sort of stood up and like yapped for a while. I think he said, you have no mandate. Then he was very dramatically thrown out by the sergeant at arms after Speaker Mike Johnson invited the sergeant to do so. I saw one woman holding a sign that said, "This is not normal." So there was definitely a sour mood and expressed on the part of the Democrats, which I would say played right into Trump's hands because he launched his speech with the claim that this is the most consequential and successful 43 days of a presidency in American history, first 43 days of a presidency in American history, which struck me as one of those Trumpian hyperboles that in this case might actually be true. Like, I mean, you could probably say Lincoln, you could name presidents who have had equally significant opening days, but that's the level that we're talking about for the number of things he's done and that he can talk about doing, whether you like them or not. And in listing them off, Trump consistently put the Democrats in the position, as he said he would put them in the position of not applauding for things like a young black boy who is fighting brain cancer and loves the cops and the military, the decision to define the two genders as male and female according to the federal government. Basically, these 80-20 issues the Democrats are on the 20% side of and really showed it. Plus, it was just hilarious. I mean, there were so many laugh lines. One that really didn't get enough play that I could see, but the one that really cracked me up, and then I'll ask you guys sort of what you thought of the whole thing, um, was when he's talking about this bill, very serious bill that is supposed to make it possible to take down like AI pornography, illicit imagery generated by AI, so that these poor girls in high school don't have these grotesque images made of them without their consent. And he's talking about this very necessary piece of legislation. Gets to the end of it and he goes, and I'm going to make use of that law myself, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. It's just like Trumpian AI porn, which probably is out there, I'm afraid to say, but that ought to give you a flavor for how the whole thing went down. What did you guys think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much right. What I thought was interesting was in his first term, when he would give State of the Union speech, like I don't remember which one it was, but all the women Democrats came dressed all in white. This time they all wore pink. And there was I mean, this is a question that I've been going over and over even since before the election, which is like, how will like the resistance manifest itself this time around? And obviously, it doesn't have the same energy. Like when they all were wearing white, it was like, wow, this is amazing. That's what the suffragettes wore. And these women they are standing up. They are not going to take this lying down. It really seemed as though he had some like successful opposition. And of course, this time around, it's all just, and well, it occurred to me that the reason the Democrats are so sour, I mean, Nancy Pelosi, when they showed her sitting in the crowd last night, and
with her grizzled claw clutched around the top of her cane.
Yes, and she looked like she was trying to chew her own face from the inside out. I mean, she was just like in such misery, as opposed to like, I don't know if you remember, like when she was Speaker of the House, and she did this kind of weird sort of clapping motion at Trump when he was coming up, and people like it became very memeable of like, ooh, she's going to get him.
Less seal claps.
Yeah. But it was, whatever it was. But, and then she like ripped up his speech. And well, it occurred to me that the problem is that, okay, the Democrats threw everything they had at Trump to try to destroy him. And it all failed. And even knowing all of everything that they said about him and trying to put him in prison and everything and impeaching him twice, he still won. And I guess the problem is the Democrats don't really have any policies. Like all they have is, we hate Trump. He's a liar. He's really bad. And since that didn't work, now they're just like, of course they're miserable because they don't have like a positive platform to put forward. I mean, at this point,
idea what they want. Like the response after the speech. I don't know if you guys watched this, but they trotted out some lady from Michigan to like ventriloquize normalcy, which is obviously the winning platform. One of Trump's greatest phrases was the common sense revolution. So that's how he's framing his whole thing. And so they brought this like sort of imaginary blue dog. Yeah, exactly. Who's like a blue dog Democrat kind of, or she's at least plays one on TV. And it was like, well, that all sounds like a very formidable Democratic Party. Unfortunately, there are about 10 very serious structural obstacles to the Democrats becoming that party. And most of the like working class stuff and the normalcy stuff is like all that energy is on the right now. So what do they think besides trans the kids?
Yeah, and because that seems to be what they keep coming back. I mean, even now, they're pushing really hard on transing the kids, which
Yep.
isn't that what they lost on? It's so weird that that's what
They
they're.
lost on it like astronomically, like
Yeah,
asteroid strike level, they lost on that issue. Yes. There's so many. I mean, we don't really need to rehearse the reasons why they can't go back on that. But
right.
it's actually, there's like the route backward is closed. And so, yeah, the resistance is so limp. It's like, I think at some point I said like the resistance 2.0, this time it's corpulent and their heart's not in it.
Well, and I was thinking about fact checking. I'm like, okay, I wonder if like Politico or Washington, who's fact checking this in real time? Remember that used to be a real thing. Like we're gonna
Mhm.
fact check this in real time, but everybody knows that those people are liars. Like fact
Right.
checkers are just other
Right.
journalists. They're not judges. They don't have any authority, and it's kind of totally transparent at this point. So nobody cares. Like if you're fact checking, it's completely subjective. So their entire shtick has basically worn thin. So they have to do stunts like having Al Green and pretending like he's some kind of lion of the Congress, like
I know.
some great civil rights hero.
I was like lying on my couch, sort of trying vaguely to discern the face of this person. And he was wearing one of those. You're right, Seth. They had he had his outfit on like he was like he was sitting at the lunch counter or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it was just like, so what? This is the guy. I had to ask Grok who he was. Grok gave a very good answer, by the way.
I mean, he actually has like this like really sordid sexual history with like his yes. I mean, he was completely
Not a surprise.
He's not like anybody's. It's really like tragedy repeating as comedy when they bring out these guys, because all of like John Lewis died, so they don't really have any great heroes of the civil rights movement anymore. Now it's become like, well, if you were born during the civil rights movement,
You were marching in spirit.
yeah,
Right. That's right. I was there, like a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Seth, just to go back to something you said, Aaron Wrenn actually pointed this out regarding the fact checking. It's like, so the same people, the Jake Tappers of the world who helped cover up Biden's dementia for years and years and years, they're now turning around and expecting us to trust their fact checking.
right.
I mean, come on, what a joke. Like, the emperor's no clothes. I mean, the institutional trust is basically completely gone at this point. Who cares what these people say? Like, it's just no one listens to them anymore. And as far as the Democrats go, I mean, just small, wimpy with their signs, horrible optics, petty. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on, just with the different words, just describing to the levels that the Democrats have sunk. I mean, it's a joke. Like the theater kid stuff, all this. Who
Right.
cares? I mean, it just doesn't work anymore. Ethan Haim, who was, I think, a guest of Josh Hawley, he was up in the gallery, and he was just talking about where even the guests the Democrats invited, even they didn't stand up for the cancer survivor, for Lake and Riley. I mean, it's just amazing, just this kind of almost like mind disease. They just don't have anything. There's nothing positive. All the energy is clearly with Trump. I mean, it's so reminiscent kind of FDR in a way. I mean, Trump said Biden is the worst president in American history, totally stomping on his opponents, crushing them just like FDR did, calling Republicans fascists and all that. It's just he's in the catbird seat. He has all the momentum. It's basically now, managed decline versus like energy, ambition, patriotism. Do you want soulless bureaucracy? Do you want assertive Republican government? Like the choices are just very stark.
Totally. We should say, since we're mentioning this kid, that his name is DJ Daniel, the cancer survivor who wants to become a police officer. He was made, I think, an agent of the Secret Service, which was very, very, very cute and got a great photo.
I mean, to be fair, the Democrats did applaud him. They just didn't stand up.
Sure. No,
right,
that's true.
right.
I mean, and this part of it is very standard fare, where you bring in human interest
Yeah.
faces to associate with your agenda. What's not so usual is the Trumpian forcing Elizabeth Warren to clap for the continuation of the war in Ukraine for the next 5 years, and then calling her Pocahontas while she does it. I mean, that's just the stuff. The zaniest president we've ever had, surely. I know that we've made a comparison between this moment and the Restoration before on this podcast, so I don't feel too bad suggesting a parallel with Henry V, of whom I was just telling you guys I'm reading a biography of him. And, he was the next king but one after Richard II, the failed monarch who is immortalized in Shakespeare's play and often kind of decked and dressed up in all these very sort of fey, flamboyant clothes. And that's the famous speech, "For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings." And there really was a lot of truth to this, apparently, that Richard was all flash and all tyranny at home and gentleness abroad. So he was very much a Biden figure, like an impotent but loud tyrant who would like whisper yell at you. And Henry spent a good deal of time as a kid in Richard II's court, but then his dad, Henry Bolingbroke, Henry IV, staged this successful revolution and took over. And then Henry V inherited the throne and became known as the great medieval English monarch. I mean, he's still, even now, there's really no contest besides Richard Lionheart, Richard I. Henry V is iconic. And one thing he took from Richard, there is a point to this, I promise, is this flair for showmanship and this taste for the theatrics of leadership. So he was in many ways the antithesis of Richard II, but he had this ability to like engineer. He would put the tent in precisely the pavilion in the place on the battlefield at the moment of forgiveness for, all this medieval stuff that then gets picked up in the chroniclers. And I was thinking about him as I was watching Trump here, because it's really like the maneuvering that you're seeing, irrespective, we're going to get in a second into the policies and what's going on in the world, but the maneuvering that you're seeing going on, it's like that part really is 12D chess, and he's playing against like a less than intelligent teenager at this. I mean, the Democrats just are. I wonder what AOC thinks of all this and what she's sort of got planned or how she's planning her future.
Well, one I think measure of how off the Democrats are is, I mean, I know that they don't get a chance to introduce their guests, but I gather that the guests that they brought were like fired government workers. And this kind of speaks to their, like, how much in a bubble they are.
Right.
Like, to them, fired government workers are like the most sympathetic. Now, obviously, look, I'm not in favor. I feel bad for people who get fired, but at the same time, it's not exactly who the American people cry over.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they didn't bring out like hurricane victims or, I don't know, like the mother of a woman who died of an ectopic pregnant, or, this sort of thing, like so bringing out fired government workers. It's like, okay, in New York, for instance, like we're in an election cycle and all of the politicians just keep talking about how their main issue is that the nonprofits need to get paid on time. And because nonprofits are their true constituency, lobbyists and nonprofits, that's all they care. And so to them, it's like, well, what do you mean you don't care about that? So similarly, the Democrats, like, they can't get out of their own like bubble of like who their constituency is.
Yeah, brought out this list of, I think it was USAID extravagances that we've talked about on the show. Some of these have floated around the internet and proven not to be true, but then there's plenty that are like perfectly egregious. And he just like rattled them off. And yeah, you can totally see, Seth, how those fired government workers would have played great in the focus group, because there is like,
Right.
at some level of remove, there is a slight vulnerability, not for Trump really, but for the right, where we're very gleeful and excited to see the government cut down to size. And many of these programs really are wasteful and absurd. And so it's sometimes difficult for like online rightoids to distinguish between that glee and the glee of like some random career service person losing his or her job. So you could, like, again, at 10 degrees of remove, you could imagine how this would represent a weakness for Trump. And that's exactly the level at which I'm sure these conversations are happening within the Democrat Party, where they're sitting around being like, well, I'm looking at this post on Twitter and it's really got like a lot of support out there for, the assistant undersecretary of trans opera in Beijing,
Right.
That's very funny that they that's what they think is their best play. And it may be their best play of the available options.
I thought it was hilarious. One of the lines, Trump just belting out egg prices are out of control. And that just like came out of absolutely nowhere. I mean, no connection to, I think, the previous statement at all. It just shows you just how much he really kind of controlled the room, controlled the night. The Republican Party is Trump's party in a way where it absolutely was not in 2016, where you had, okay, some sympathetic guys here and there, but overall the party was pretty much in lockstep against him. He humiliated them. Yeah, McConnell worked with him, obviously got some of his judges across. Maybe we'll talk about later with the ruling that just happened and how, Trump's justices specifically are doing. But it really is his party now in a way that it wasn't. I mean, the Republicans seemed to me like I've never seen them that energetic and just raucous and that many applause lines and just, it was almost like a sporting event or something. It was really interesting to me. So just the energy of the room really, really jumped out to me in a way that, it just hasn't, even during Trump's first term.
Yeah, on the eggs, and this can be our segue into talking about some of these actual policies, because the economy is obviously one of the major issues he ran on and something that is currently kind of, I think, in flux. But he has this line when he talks about the eggs. He turns to Chris Wright, who's the energy secretary, because one of his big economic platforms is like, we're going to drill, baby, drill, and we're going to reopen all these plants that Biden shut down, or we're going to remove the blocks to their operating and so forth. And he just looks at Chris Wright and he goes, "Secretary, do a good job. Do a good job, Secretary."
That was weird because wouldn't you want to talk to the agriculture secretary about that?
That was my thought too. It was like,
right.
it was like sort of Trumpian stream of consciousness association. He was very relaxed, I think, and he just he was thinking, well, the eggs, the economy. But let's then move into talking about the economy, because we're now in the next stage, I guess, of the Trump tariff plan. And on February 1st, there was this like emergency situation. Now we're raising the tariffs to, I think it's 25% against Canada and Mexico, with additional against China. There's a stated rationale here, which has to do with fentanyl, that this is like payback for bringing fentanyl across our borders. But there then is also this idea of like made in America, encouraging American manufacturing. And during the speech, that was really how Trump presented it, is, well, look, like, Taiwan is now going to make chips in America, and Apple is pouring more money back into our economy. And he brought a steel worker to be in the audience to really just say, this is basically going to encourage us to bring like a lot of our manufacturing capacity and a lot of our industry back home. And it was combined with things like the no tax on tips stuff, lowering the income tax. Also, interest payments on cars made in America will be tax deductible if Trump has his way, I guess. But basically, he's selling this tariff war, I guess, with these countries as a matter of like national security with the fentanyl, but really primarily as a way of like helping the American worker. And he made this one, again, very Trumpian little aside. He goes, "There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. Little disturbance. It won't be much. Won't be much." Oh. And then he like he mocked the people that are causing problems, the worry that's going to cause a problem. So I guess, like, what do you guys make of all this? Like, tariffs don't directly cause inflation the way they sometimes are said to, but they do raise prices. And Trump is like vulnerable to this attack because it was something he hit Biden on. But of course, also, like, tariffs are not the unheard of monstrosity that we've been led to believe. They're a normal instrument of economic global policy, and certainly it was before Trump made it an issue. It was widely acknowledged on left and right that our manufacturing capacity is a problem. So is this going to ultimately work out for Trump? Am I making too much out of these choppy? I mean, it seems like this is a delicate business, and I'm wondering if you guys think he's doing a good job with it.
No, I don't think you are. I think this is difficult. Just going back to tariffs in principle, I mean, one of the great things about Trump is he really kind of resurrected the traditional Republican Party stand on tariffs. I mean, you go back to, I think, the second law passed in Congress in 1789 was a tariff. You go to Hamilton's Report of Manufacturers, you go to Lincoln, you go to, Henry Clay, the American system. It's just tariff, tariff, tariff. So tariffs are now being brought back as an element of statecraft. I think that's very important. Now it's a totally different question how you wield them. And I do agree with you. Trump does need to, I think, really think about these, target them in the right way. It almost seems like now, and actually I read this in Pirate Wires this morning, where, he could just be kind of pushing whatever button is available and seeing kind of how the reactions are from both Canada and Mexico, and just seeing even what he can get out of them even more than he already has. Because like you said, the fentanyl thing, I mean, how much fentanyl is coming through Canada? Nothing. I mean, it's only through Mexico, and I think there are already 10,000 troops already deployed. The Mexico has actually deployed themselves to deal with that. So I think this is just throw things out there. This is just like on the, Greenland and some other kind of almost seemingly crazy things that he's kind of thrown out there, just to kind of see what. Yeah, just to kind of, Greenland was also in the speech, just to kind of almost throw everything up in the wall and just see what sticks. But I do agree. He, especially with prices, he does have to be, thinking about this and thinking about the possible blowback.
By the way, that 3 Morning Takes newsletter that you're quoting from Pirate Wires, I hate to ever recommend any publication besides our own and send people to it, but that is an indispensable newsletter.
Oh, it is.
It's so readable.
Yeah, they do a great job with it.
I'm not an expert on trade or economics.
Well, I am, so that's
I know. Well, that's why I haven't been saying much.
Me neither.
But I would let you guys take it. I don't know. I mean, it sounds as though other countries use tariffs a lot more extensively, and the American model has been sort of like, I don't know, let's let everybody else have a chance. I mean, I guess after World War II, when everybody else was Germany and Japan were in a complete, and Europe was just torn apart, then we let them have high tariffs so they could rebuild their industrial base. And I feel like we're still stuck in that mode. Regarding the economy, I mean, the eggs thing was funny because I feel like that's Trump, because eggs have gone up a lot since Trump came in. Now, I think that's because of bird flu, and because they've had to cull 200 million chickens or something like that. But at the same time, he's kind of seizing that point because the Democrats have been talking about it a lot. So he's kind of making it no, you're the ones. This is what he likes to do. The funny thing is I don't remember Trump ever talking about eggs during the campaign, but now the Democrats are trying to make it as though this was his main platform, that he would bring down the price of it.
Really important. Yeah, they're trying to meme it into a critique primarily of people who voted for Trump. So if you go on Instagram Reels or wherever your preferred platform is for encountering the loopy cat mom class, you will find people making these spiteful jokes oh, now I am, now our national parks are going to close and they're going to, a plane is going to crash into Yosemite, but at least you got cheaper eggs. Enjoy your fascism with your cheap eggs. And so, Trump has obviously picked up on that somehow as an accusation, which is interesting. Yeah.
Regarding the economy, I mean, the economy's going technically into some kind of recession, but that's because GDP includes government spending. And this is in a way, ripping the mask off of how they calculate GDP. Mm-hmm. I mean, this goes back to the government worker. I mean, one thing that the best insult to do against government workers when you're talking to them is to say, well, you're not a taxpayer. You're paid by taxes.
Right.
You don't, there's no net increase in productivity from what you do. I mean, it's probably unfair and it's really mean, but they're well, we pay taxes. I'm right, but you're just kind of giving back some of what you took.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that extends to this other question of like, well, how much of our what we call our productivity is just the government spending things, and
Totally.
and since the government can invent money, what kind of economy? I mean, or the economy seems like it's a little bit fake.
Yes,
Um,
and that's inflationary. I mean, again, even I, an idiot, like know that that is what mainly causes inflation.
right.
And
But that's kind of
yeah,
also why I understand that Trump is not like a Wall Street Journal classical liberal when it comes to like economics, obviously. But at the same time, like the idea that they're going to send out like Doge bounties, like all the money that we're saving from Doge, we're going to return it to the American people. We're going to send out checks. I mean, that just sounds like a recipe for disaster.
yeah,
Like, doesn't
yeah,
that
yeah.
just increase that's just like the during COVID, but for even less reason because there's not
Right.
like mass unemployment. So I don't think that that's like a great idea. Also, I don't really like the gold card idea.
No,
Mm-mm.
I was
I
that was
don't
just
either.
about to bring that up. I bristled at this. This is like skills-based immigration, but it's wealth-based immigration, basically. Is that
Well,
the idea?
we've had that before. I can't
Uh-huh.
remember what E2 visas where like if you promise to invest $1 million in like certain economically disadvantaged zones, then you can get a green card or whatever for you and your family.
Right.
And it's always just been gamed, so it doesn't. Basically, people don't have to put $1 million in, and or they could. It's kind of like a scam.
And
But
that's why you don't have like the Samar El Kaduk like community center in South in Compton.
right, but like the $5 million. Now, here's my question. Okay, so say some rich guy gives $5 million. Does he get a green card and everybody in his family gets green cards, or do they have to give $5 million for each of them? Now that would
Hmm.
make a little bit more sense. Otherwise, it's just another form of chain migration, but for like, I don't know, oligarchs. That just
That part that was what really stuck with me was if one of the critiques Trump is vulnerable to is that of kind of amassing around himself a clique of like tech magnates who
Mhm.
are disfavored by his base, or at least his base is suspicious of them precisely because of their cosmopolitanism. That they're not actually aligned on this like more nativist populist side. They're a little bit more infamously with Vivek Ramaswamy. They're a little bit more about like importing all the nerds from India
Mhm.
or whatever. If that is something that both his opponents and some of his friends are worried about, then it's probably not going to do him any favors to basically create a rich nerd importation program, especially if, right, it also has all the problems of birthright citizenship that we've been talking about. Yeah, uh, I think you guys are both right that he's like throwing things to the wall to see what sticks. In a second, we should talk about the meeting with Zelensky, and there too, like if you watch the whole thing, he's obviously behaving like a negotiator, which is a very specific way of behaving. And it's not a way that we're used to seeing presidents behave. It's not a way that we're used to seeing economists behave. It doesn't actually depend on like a really granular, fine-grained knowledge of all the particulars of the matter. It has much more to do with like bluffing and plausible like offers that you can and importantly the ability to see what people want and what they have to offer. So like the thing about Trump that is actually true, I'm learning, like at the core of what he's actually doing is that he can see what people how strong their negotiating position is and how strong his is and how to engineer kind of mutually beneficial exchanges between various parties, which is the skill of like a guy who we would usually find presenting a PowerPoint deck at a self-help summit, right? Like this is you usually pay some exorbitant fee to like go for a weekend and hear somebody tell you how to do this. Trump is kind of a master of it, clearly. And he treats everything that way, including like, yeah, let's see, punch back on the tariffs. Like, why should we be encouraging European dominance over and against American products? Why shouldn't we just throw our weight around a little bit and see what happens? So I guess we'll I guess we'll find out. maybe we should then talk about this Zelensky thing, which again will bring us back to another major plank of the speech. We're not going to talk, I guess, so much today about immigration, except we did just touch on the gold card. But just to say that it seems like from the speech, maybe that's going to be one of his next moves, is like a big immigration crackdown.
I wanted to mention this. The best line of the speech was when he said, he's talking about the immigrations and the deportations, and he said, and the border, and he's like, well, they said we needed a new law in order to close the border, but it turns out all we needed was a new president.
That was
which is exactly the
great
case.
line.
It was so, and for like 30 years, of reading about immigration, like people have always said, we have all the existing laws we need.
Yeah.
We don't need new laws on this. All you have to do is just operate with the existing laws. But there's been this reluctance to do it, I guess, because they don't like the law. So
this is something that we talk about in civil rights stuff too, where with DEI.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about it a lot, actually. I think we've talked about it on the podcast, that we sit around and we're like, wow, DEI, this really grotesque, un-American like way of judging people based on their skin, kind of this old-fashioned racism. Why can't we just have a law that says, like, in America, we don't judge people on the basis of their skin, or like we don't, hire people? Oh, wait, we literally have that law. And not only is nobody paying attention to it, it's arguably a major driving force behind the problem that we are currently seeing. So it doesn't matter what the paper says, unless you have the people who believe in the thing. And yeah, Trump kind of gets that too, and is probably right about the immigration stuff. Because one of his opening salvos was like, look how illegal immigration has plummeted. And of course, that's another area where the Biden administration was so egregious that what can the Democrats do? They have to basically say, no, it was good. We liked that. We liked having a senile Jello jar in the White House, while like hordes of
well, they keep claiming that Biden was stricter on immigration than Trump, and that his deportation numbers were higher, that fewer. Obviously they're lying.
Sure, but right. No, I mean, this is really, it's funny how because there was a brief like vanishing. This is like the equivalent to in 2016, when for just an evanescent like sliver of time, like blink and you'll miss it, the New York Times was being like, we need to go into flyover country and we need to find like regular Americans that understand what we got wrong, because we got this wrong. And it was like the Saturday Night Live ladies who pretend to be NPR Terry Gross. I forget they're just like, you might say we should learn what Americans think and want. So that lasted for about 5 seconds before they were telling us that we were wrong. We were the problem.
Right.
And it was the Trump voters, that were terrorists. And I guess the equivalent of that this time around is the thing where for a half second, a hot minute in between like Biden's disastrous debate where he fell apart and 5 days after Trump's election, Democrats and their cronies in the press were like, I guess we do have to kind of admit that this whole like open border thing, it was kind of that was a problem. I guess we sort of have to concede that like he was deteriorating in front of our eyes, and we did kind of cover it up. I mean, the Wall Street Journal did that whole expose about how everybody knew about this, like in 2021, from like day one, basically, of the Biden presidency. It was apparent that he was like dissolving into a puddle. And so there was some accountability where they were like, we really didn't get this. Now I'm watching C-SPAN and it's like, oh, I remember Biden's State of the Union really put to rest a lot of the rumors about his mental decline. It's like they're totally just revising this history I don't think they have the same like narrative control that they had that would enable them to do that. But yes, they have completely forgotten all of the things, which, let's not give them any ideas. Go right ahead. Please keep running on all these platforms. But yeah, we should talk Zelensky. So on Friday, there was a meeting in the Oval Office, chiefly with Trump and Zelensky, but JD Vance was also there. Briefly, there was some intervention from Marco Rubio. And this is all around, I mean, obviously it's around the war in Ukraine, but it's also around this deal that Trump is trying to cut, where it's sort of like that meme trade offer. We get raw earth minerals, which Ukraine has, and you
Raw
get
earth. That's what
raw
Trump
earth.
Trump kept calling them raw earth.
Did he really? I'm becoming everybody's rare earth minerals. This is raw earth minerals is the RFK Jr. platform. It's like what raw earth minerals are what I put on my face every morning to keep my skin looking fresh. Uh, no, rare earth minerals. You get to like not have to surrender without terms to Putin because we will continue to give you military support from America. And Trump is framing this as like, we've been putting in all this money and all the support. We're not getting anything back. So this is getting something back. We're getting this access to Ukrainian rare earth minerals. And they met to sort of do a presser about this deal, which has been revised already up to this point. The dollar value has been revised a couple times, but basically they're kind of like on the verge of moving forward with this. And they have one of these meetings that are, I don't know, millions of these happen all the time, and they're usually pretty staid. They're usually like the whatever sausage gets made is made in the back room, and then you have the actual like presser where they answer questions and they try to present a united front and try to be civil to one another. And that was basically what was going on. There was some contention. If you watch the whole thing, really most of it is tense but civil. And then I have to say, when they erupt into their fight, I like get audibly gasped. Like I think really what happened here is like an event occurred that was not behind closed doors. Like we saw actual interactions between major figures in world politics, which is kind of crazy to think that that's so rare that it has become this like week long news story. But that's what it was. It was like, oh, they're actually duking it out, because the main thing about the events leading up to that point is that although they are both clearly trying to like accomplish a rapprochement, running throughout the entire conversation is this underlying and fundamental disagreement. They are fundamentally at odds about what they want and their objective. Trump is trying to avoid World War III. Like he wants his legacy to be cutting the deals and the ceasefires that will end the conflicts that erupted under Biden's watch. You might say, and I'm sure Trump has this in mind, that he's thinking of Bishop Henry Beaufort, who said, "Let us make wars so that we might have peace, for the end of war is peace." That actually is Trump's sort of attitude here about this stuff. And he's up, keeps saying like, they obviously hate each other, but we've got to find some way. My role is to broker a deal. Zelensky, either because he's been used to like Democrat acquiescence or because he was coached on trying to like beat his chest around Trump or something, basically is still on the position that Putin needs to be like beaten back entirely and Russia must be driven into the ground and made to surrender. And like, Ukraine has to recover all its old territory. And Trump, I think rightly, is like, that's just not going to much as we might desire that, that's just not going to happen. So they're going back and forth about this. There's some funny moments where Trump is like, look, Russia, like Putin, endured Russiagate. He was given this responsibility for this total fabrication, and he never like had a problem with that. So he's trying to like make some case for Putin. But this is all as it starts to unravel until finally Zelensky really just steps over the line and says, "You don't feel now the consequences of us losing the war, but you will feel them." And then Trump is just like, "What the hell is this little nebbish doing?" And it's actually JD Vance, because they're starting to talk about JD's like speech in Europe, and he's like, "Look, you come in here, you never say thank you," and Trump then says like, "You don't have any of the cards," which is true. So anyway, there's this big dust up, which seems very like frightening. And then the deal is paused. But then Zelensky, of course, like expresses his regret, wants to come back to the table, wants to do the deal again. So like this whole saga is sort of in the background, I guess, of this speech in which they're calling him a Russian agent. They're calling him like, oh, he's betraying our allies or whatever. But this actually seems like a perfect example of this thing that he does, which is, to be clear, has like major risks, right? Like there are risks associated with this sort of negotiation. But so far, I don't know, like seems to be working. Like, would you guys say you feel more or less like confident about our safety from World War III in the wake of all these episodes?
Oh, I mean, a lot more confident. I think what you saw for the first time in a long time, I mean, you saw statecraft at the highest levels, like actually out in public, like you said, Spencer. And I think that needs to be talked about a lot. You saw, I think Biden blew up Zelensky, but that was behind closed doors. So these things have certainly been happening for a long, long time. But you really saw Trump and Vance really put it to him and say, look, we've been supporting you. We're probably the reason why you're even in the position you're in now, why the war hasn't ended already. And you need to do your part. We can't keep just supporting you blindly. Like, we need an end to this war. We need to think about American interests above all. And don't disrespect us, like, in the Oval Office, in the White House itself. Like, you can't do that. So, I mean, just very, very powerful images. Trump understands the medium so well. I think he and Vance both do. They understand what that was going to look like. You saw Zelensky, I think, like, his chief aide just like gasped basically what was happening. And then just yesterday, Zelensky says, I would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace. None of us want an endless war. Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible. So, I mean, what a turnaround. And it just shows, again, it's like the Democrats, which Trump baits them, they fall for, stupid Drumpf. But it's like, but you fall for this guy nonstop. It's the same thing in this one, too, where it's like Zelensky was trying to appeal to some even like anti-Trump element. I mean, the kind of people that I think he was used to dealing with. And that utterly failed spectacularly. I mean, probably one of the worst diplomatic disasters in history. But now it shows that Trump has all the cards. He really does. He knows what he's doing. And it looks like it's working now. And that we're not only going to get what we want from Ukraine, we're also simultaneously talking with Russia and getting rare earths from the territories that they hold too currently. So, I mean, it's going to come out well, I think, for us on both sides.
Yeah. I mean, I think what's kind of interesting, I mean, it seems as though Zelensky, he was saying, well, okay, yes, Russia promises not to invade, but their promises aren't worth anything. So in a sense, he was trying to force Trump and Vance to effectively bring Ukraine into NATO just on the spot. Like, okay,
Right.
I will guarantee that they will never bother you, and then if they do, we will fight. Look, obviously that war will go nowhere. I mean,
Right.
it's just a total disaster. It seems, I mean, it's basically a US proxy war. What I thought was interesting was that Trump, in trying to set up this deal where we would be getting the raw earths in eastern Ukraine, that effectively that would be like a kind of security guarantee, because the U.S. would have major economic interests and probably have a lot of people over there digging up the rare earths. So if Russia were to start something there, it would bring us in, essentially.
That's what he said. Somebody asked. There were some good questions. This the funniest part of the whole episode was that there was this obvious like underlying tension, like the sort of philosophical dispute was very present. But they were doing first the kind of political theater, and then they had this big fight, and then at the very end, this poor woman, I don't know who she was, but she asked exactly the right question, and at that point, Trump was so ticked off that he just like basically blew her off. But she was like, what what would happen if Putin did not honor a ceasefire? Like, what is the U.S. objective? But anyway, there was one question about like, what if the people mining the rare earth are attacked by Putin? And Trump basically said like, the deal will protect them, which I think was her way of saying, this is something that's gonna. A minor side note, I basically agree with what you guys have said here. I think like this is actually the only way of proceeding, and all this stuff that people are saying about how Trump is a bad guy. Sure, you could pick around the edges of his rhetoric or when he says this and that, but really they're just mad because for however long this war's been going on, the Democrats have been indulging in this insane like Marvel movie fantasy that somehow we're gonna from afar fund the return of the Avengers, and like Zelensky's going to get his country back, which, to be clear, from my own perspective, like would be great. Like Putin's the aggressor. To me, this is like a bad war, and for all of the questions about 2014, Victoria Nuland, whatever, like you don't invade Ukraine. Yes, there's been this like whole historical dispute, whatever. All I'm saying is like I also would like to see the fantasy version that Democrats have been putting forward. It's never going to happen. They're not going to win this war. They're not going to get this stuff back. And the sooner you admit that, the sooner you can start saying, well, what is the best way, basically, to kind of like restore stability? But in order to admit that, you have to be willing to get called an evil Putin stooge and a Trumpist fascist or whatever. Very, very small point of order before we jump to recommendations and close out here is that one thing I'd never noticed before is Trump and Zelensky have remarkably similar styles of speaking. I don't know if he was just trying to kind of curry favor with Trump, but you know how Trump does that thing where he'll be talking about something and he'll be like, I was telling to my Secretary of Energy, and by the way, we have the most energy in the world. People say I'm very energetic. Zelensky would be like, we are fighting this terrible war, with all the weapons. And by the way, we have the greatest war, the greatest weapons, the greatest.
Well, they're both TV people.
Yeah.
That's their background, like either reality TV or sitcoms or whatever. They both come from the same milieu.
That must be it. I guess so. Anyway, yeah. Yeah. I just thought that was funny because everybody positions Trump as the great villain and Zelensky as like the true, Captain America
Sure.
or whatever. But in some ways they're kind of the same guy. Okay, well, this I think we've just about covered it. It's certainly America's season 2025, whatever season we're on of America, is definitely not boring. I'm also enjoying some TV, although I've recommended the TV that I'm enjoying already. So for my recommendation this time around, I am instead going to recommend a movie. We just had the Oscars, which was kind of an interesting moment. I know everybody hates the Oscars and doesn't care, and the ratings are plummeting and so forth. But we're also living through this vibe shift. And what's interesting is that movies, especially, and TV too, people don't always grasp that they get greenlit, and then there's like 2 years before they show up. So the projects that are getting approved for production now won't be Oscar contenders until like at latest or earliest 2026. And so it's obvious that the woke stuff has played itself out, but we're kind of in this limbo where a lot of the content is still very woke. And they've made all these changes to the Academy that causes the nominees to be hyper obscure, arty independent films about like trans drug lords. And I'm not making that up. And whatever. We've talked about this ad nauseum. But the ceremony is very interesting because they had obviously told people not to do politics in their speeches. They're very short speeches and mostly kind of apolitical. But near the end, people started getting drunk and they made all of these crazy claims, or they started, I guess, to like veer into the usual. And at that point, it really did just become, Conan himself looked embattled and exhausted. And then finally, they gave the Oscar to Honora, which is a movie I kind of liked. It was every scene was about 90 seconds too long, but it's this fun, like picaresque adventure from a sex worker. This was one of the things that they got very, very huffy about at the end of the show. But it's about a prostitute who, like, marries this oligarch, and then gets kicked to the curb, and kind of bleak but funny, and great performance in it by Mikey Madison. However, having said all that, my recommendation is not that you go and watch Nora, but rather via my friend Giancarlo Sopo, who is a film critic for National Review, among other places. He heard that I liked Honora, and he said, okay, if you like Honora, you got to watch Knights of Cabiria, because everything that's good about Honora that they're giving it the Oscar for is in this Fellini film, black and white Italian movie called Knights of Cabiria. And Cabiria is the name of the lady of the night who stars in this movie, which again is very picaresque, is very much similar to Honora, in that it's about this poor woman getting mistreated, and like, she's sort of got this tough exterior, but she's always being brutalized and kicked around. And everybody's always telling her, like, Cabiria, why are you going with this man? But she's, so the whole plot is basically very similar. But in the background is the Italian Catholic Church. And this changes everything about the movie. It just makes it vastly more interesting because, of course, to care for the prostitute, to live in a moral universe that both takes it for granted that you shouldn't sell your body for money, and has this special particular care for the like well-being and ultimate repentance of quote unquote sex workers, i.e. prostitutes, like, just elevates this movie to a vastly more interesting work of art. I was shattered by the end of it. Plus, I kept going around afterwards saying "Cubby idiot, Cubby idiot," because there really is like the acting. The performance is also the central performance is also very good, but it's a very heightened, like Italian, older Italian style. So you should you can watch it over multiple nights. It's got this kind of episodic structure. Knights of Kabira, Night, not the Knights of Kabira, but the Knights of Cubby idiot is my recommendation. Does anybody else have anything they want to recommend?
Sure. So definitely must talk about Vice President Vance. We ran his Munich speech at the American Mind on Monday. It's in the editor's picks. And yeah, it's just kind of the first blow, really, when you link to Zelensky and Europe and everything what's going on of kind of, the Trump administration statecraft. So it's just one of those speeches I think needs to be read, needs to be pondered. One thing kind of struck me when you read it, especially like, dissident right wing Twitter. I mean, you read it and it's like, wow, this seems kind of so normy. But you also have to have the audience in mind. You have to have, all these different levels of what he was trying to do. But I think the fundamental thing is, look, it's either the consent of the governed or it's just bureaucratic malaise. It's people making decisions for you, people outlawing political parties. You look at what's going on right now in Germany with AfD. They're just still trying to blockade, this party that I think is now in, second place, but they're now out of the ruling coalition. The media doesn't want to talk about them. Heather McDonald actually had a great piece in City Journal about AfD. I'd highly recommend that. David Goldman has written for the American Mind too about AfD. So if you just look up David Goldman at American Mind, you can find that too. But yeah, Vance's speech is just one of those things that you need to read, you need to ponder, and you need to think about, and think kind of beyond some of the things just on social media, the dichotomies and everything, and really think about it kind of, statecraft at a grand scale.
Okay, my recommendation is this woman on YouTube that I came upon, and I just got kind of like addicted to watching her streams. She's this judge in San Antonio named Stephanie Boyd. She's just this kind of middle-aged black church lady type, and she's a judge.
Yeah.
But it's amazing because like people will come up before her and it's like, all right, they had stolen a lawnmower a few years ago and they were put on like probation, basically, like supervised, whatever. And then they somehow violated the conditions of their probation. And now they're brought up before her and she'll sort of just listen to it. And you kind of expect, okay, well, I guess, maybe they violated their conditions by, I don't know, maybe drunk driving or yelling. It was some minor thing. And then she'll be like, okay, well, the court is going to sentence you to 5 years in prison. So it's just like the most like, it's always unexpected, like what she comes up with. But she's just like, she's very charming in her own way. She always has these little stories to tell. And but she's so harsh with her punishments.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, who is this woman? I look her up and like, she's a Democrat. So I was like, well, I guess this is like Texas style Democrat because she's like so punitive, but so sort of like charming. I know this is a little bit like recherche perhaps, but Judge Stephanie Boyd is definitely worth watching.
Judge Stephanie Boyd on YouTube. She's a YouTuber.
Yeah. She has like I guess they let her stream her appearances, and then she has kind of like a little bit of a cult following, I think, people who like to excerpt her things. Yeah, it's fascinating for some reason, but whatever. It gives you a real glimpse into the not even like the sordid like this, just the kind of like griminess of like the American lumpen life. So it's kind of fun.
For some reason, I feel like this person follows me on Twitter, but I'm looking at her now and I think maybe not. So I will now follow her on YouTube instead and try not to get on her bad side.
Okay.
That's awesome. Okay, all great recs. And yeah, the JD Vance speech, obviously major precursor to everything we talked about today with Zelensky, and a very consequential speech in its own right as well. Total coup for us to have it up on AmericanMind.org. And that is all that we have time for. So we're going to bid you adieu. Thank you very much for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to read The American Mind, which you totally should, you should go to AmericanMind.org. And if you want to learn more about our various Claremont projects, you can go to ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com for our sister publication, the Claremont Review of Books, about to drop. Big, juicy new issue, which we will highlight some pieces from also at TAM. You can check out our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org, and you can donate to support our work by going to claremont.org/donate. We obviously appreciate that hugely. And you're welcome to remain anonymous, but also you're welcome to request a shout out on the roundtable for your donation if that is something that you would find appealing. Thanks to our production and engineering crew, the brothers G, Jake, and Ryan Gannon. And thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.